Thank you for joining us today for talks and discussion. In this part of the project, Sleeping for Tomorrow, we'll meet different people around the world sharing with us their opinion, ideas, and thoughts about the changes of our time and their hope for the future. I have the pleasure to talk today to NICO MESTERHARM, the director of the Meta House Goethe-Center, the Cambodian art center based in Phnom Penh. Thank you, Nico, for joining us for this talk. I'm very interested to know if you can tell us how was it for you in 2000 when you came in Cambodia and what changed and evolved from that time?
Well, I came to Cambodia in 2000 as a tourist first. I saw the famous Angkor Wat temples, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Visited a friend who lived at that time in Phnom Penh, and sort of understood that at this time, Phnom Penh compared to, for example, Thailand, a country which I knew already, Cambodia was at a different development level. And while Thailand, especially the cities, was already well developed, Cambodia around the millennium was not so developed. As my job is documentary filmmaking, I went back to Berlin and I found TV stations, clients who were interested in producing short TV features, documentaries about Cambodia. And I did that and found very early local collaborators and worked with an entirely Cambodian team here in Cambodia from 2000 to 2007 as a filmmaker. And because of my Cambodian friends, my Cambodian colleagues, I learned in these 7 years here in the early film business about the difficulties for them to get education, the difficulties for them to exchange with other colleagues. I got to know artists who told me that there were almost no galleries at that time. There was a French Cultural Center and a Russian Cultural Center. Both centers operated in their languages, in their respective languages. So if you didn't speak French or didn't speak Russian, it was hard for you to access these spaces. So I basically learned that Cambodians and foreigners, like me, needed a place to exchange ideas, develop projects. And so in 2007, in January, I opened my own little house, which was opposite the pagoda where Cambodia's infamous revolutionary leader, Pol Pot, once was a monk. I opened my house, or the ground floor of my house, which was actually kind of a long, dark tunnel, didn't look like a living room, transformed that into a gallery and offered that space for artists to exhibit. And on the rooftop of this house, we had little film screenings. I screened my own films, colleagues screened their films. So it was a very informal thing, like in Berlin, where I come from, you would call it a salon. It was a weekend activity, kind of a pastime thing, a hobby. And it was never meant to develop into a full swing art center. But because in 2007, when we started that, the Phnom Penh's event calendar was so tiny that the project picked up. It was already called Meta House. Meta in Cambodian language means loving kindness. It's an old word. It's one of the 4 Buddhist principles, loving kindness. Yeah? And we chose that name definitely also because of the Greek reference, meta, level, whatever, but also because it's very inviting for Cambodians. They feel that if the place is called Meta, they can come, they can share their thoughts, they will be understood. So, and this actually led to the success of the early days. And for the first exhibitions, we had much more people than we expected. And in the course of the first 3 years, it became so popular, our little community center, that at some point we changed locations already then with the help of the German cultural Foundation Goethe Institute. So in 2010, we moved out of my private house to a bigger center in the city center of Phnom Penh, and had there a very good run for 9 years, from 2010 to 2019. Moved to a third location because we lost the rental contract for location number 2, renovated that third location, and then COVID hit. Yeah. So basically we had, before COVID-19, almost 12 years of continuous success. And for me, I still continue to work as a filmmaker, but because it was so popular and because we had so much fun also doing it, did less films and became an event manager. And because, you know, as a kid, I was always interested in the arts. I'm not a curator. I didn't study art, but it spoke to me and I had fun doing it. And I found that was the additional benefit for me, that I would learn something new almost every day by working with foreign and local artists, doing this kind of intercultural work with the Goethe Institute, and here also with the government and local art institutions and so on. So for me, from 2007 to 2020, up until COVID hit, it was to dedicate almost my whole life to build up this event center. My wife, who's also part of the team, she's a Cambodian filmmaker. My kids, my son was born a little bit before we opened Meta House in 2007. My daughter was born right in the middle of operations in 2011. So my kids grew up basically in that center. My wife worked with me. My friends worked with me. It became part of my life.
It is very interesting to hear about the development of the Meta House Goethe-Center. And I'm very interested to know if there is a difference between the local people and the artists and how they are reacting to things that are happening in the Meta House.
Well, I mean, it's clear that, as I said earlier, Cambodia is a developing country. It had a civil war, it had a genocide. So when I came in 2000, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. So now in poor countries, a larger part of the population will not be able to engage in artful activities or learn how to appreciate art. They struggle with their lives. That's one part. So when I came, the art scene was very small, and I think a majority of the population would not really consider art as something being part of their lives. However, Cambodia has a very long history, and the Cambodians, the Khmer, once were the first group in Southeast Asia to write. And the artworks, I mean, the stone masonry that you can see in Angkor Wat, tells you a little bit that there is something very artful programmed in the genetics of these people here, however you want to see that. What I want to say is Cambodians, even though they might not be very educated, there's something in Cambodians that that makes them interested in art, culture, dancing, whatever it is. So I'd like to just share this little story with you that is, for me, one of the key moments to understand how people tick here. When, I said it already, when the Civil War was still ongoing, a larger part of the population, more than 1 million, sought refuge in Thailand in refugee camps. So there were UN delegations really early. They visited these refugee camps, and people in the refugee camps had barely nothing. There was not enough food, there was not enough water, there was not enough medicine. So the assumption of these UN people visiting was people needed help, and they asked the village chiefs, the refugee chiefs, the people responsible, what do you need? They visited delegations, visited these places. On one occasion, the village chief stood up to the delegation head and said, "Sir, we need a stage." So what I want to say, the UN people, they were so surprised to hear that people whom they thought would say, "We need food, we need water, we need medicine," would ask for a stage. You need to know that during this cruel regime of Pol Pot in the 1970s, dance was forbidden, colorful clothing was forbidden, music, if it wasn't propaganda songs, was forbidden. People didn't have all that. So when they came out of these dark ages, that's what they wanted. They wanted a stage. They wanted to sing songs. They wanted to be able to paint again, to express themselves, whatever it is. So what I want to say is, even though in our daily operations, art centers, galleries, art schools, they cater to a very specific part of this population, a larger majority of Cambodians enjoys dance, enjoys paintings, and so on, if you are able to get them into your art space, or if, and we did that also in previous projects, if the art travels to the villages. Yeah, so that means that there's definitely a larger part of the population that wouldn't necessarily go into an art space. But if you promote something, if you do something in the villages, or if you personally invite them, if you take people by the hand and show them what you have to offer, they might come. Yeah. So I think a major barrier for Cambodians up until recently was always the language. Yeah. The old generation of Cambodians doesn't necessarily speak English. The old generation here spoke French once because it was a French colony. But the people who are now maybe 40, 45, they don't know so much about the French colonial times. They were educated either very little or nothing under Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, or they learned later on when the Vietnamese occupied Cambodia, maybe Vietnamese or Russian. But when I came to Cambodia, people started already to be very interested in English. Yeah. So now, but language is still a point. So if you have a problem only in English or only in French, you would leave a fair share of the population outside. If you do it in their own language, if you do it with Cambodians, if Cambodian artists present their art in Cambodian language to other Cambodians, you might even attract an audience which is not necessarily university educated.
I would like to ask you if you can share with us your feeling of what was happening in your street and your close surrounding at the time of COVID.
When COVID started, I remember it pretty clearly. The information came out of China, a new virus has emerged. The Cambodians around us, they were pretty scared at an early stage, while most of the Westerners would still say, well, it might go away. I think that in the early days of COVID also, it was perceived as something that had been imported into Cambodia. So similar to what I observed when I was in Berlin shortly after COVID broke out, and Berliners would look toward Chinese people as the people who brought the virus. Cambodians would look to foreigners here as if the foreigners would be responsible for bringing the virus into Cambodia. So it in the early days created a rift. I remember that foreigners suddenly were not allowed into supermarkets anymore or into shops. Cambodians would wear masks at a very early stage without actually being forced to wear these masks. The mask wearing a law came a little bit later. But the people here at a really, really early stage, they wanted to protect themselves. Again, I understand also that many people here, they live slightly above or under the poverty line. So they can't really risk to get infected. They don't have the money to pay for hospital services in a country where health insurance is still not the standard. So really early, people started to protect themselves, started to protect the families. Shops were closed, admission to shops was restricted. People would stay away from you. Well, you know, Cambodians, they're usually very charming, open people, always up for a chat. That all changed with COVID. It first separated the communities, foreigners, locals, and then basically by law, it separated the families. People would try to stay as much afar from each other as that was possible in order not to get sick. And I think that was always the mindset, not to get sick, was not even about not dying, it was just about not getting sick to prevent families from spending money in hospitals.
Concerning the family, the core of the family, like the Cambodian family, a lot of time, all of the generation, the grandmother, the father, the kids, everybody's living together. But in families that there were like separation, the kids and the parents were living in one place, and the grandparents or other part of the families were living in a different place. They were still coming together, or they were separated, or how do you feel it affected this culture of the Cambodian life of the family?
In Cambodia, many families, extended families, still stay together. It's completely different from what people might experience or know from German society, Western societies. Basically, what also happens in Asian countries is that sometimes grandparents, parents, kids, the husbands, wives of the kids, nephews, uncles, they stay together, maybe in one house, if the family is richer, in two houses. People here within the families, they like to stay together. Yeah, and the families are also much larger sometimes than we know it from Germany. Yeah? It's not uncommon for a Cambodian mother to have 12 children, 13 children, 14 children. Yeah, nowadays, the younger mothers, they, you know, because of economical considerations, they have less children. But in the old times, people here had many children. So the families, extended families can be huge, yeah, up to 500-600 people. You see that sometimes during New Year celebration when they all come together. These are big crowds, big parties. When COVID happened, as I said earlier, people started to protect themselves. They wore masks. However, the government had to enforce social distancing measures also within extended families. It took Cambodians a while to understand that now even in families you have to separate. And in the first year, Cambodia was affected in a very light way by COVID-19. While in Germany and in the Western world and in other countries, hell broke loose. We had only a few cases here and only a few death cases in the first year. In the second year, because, you know, people felt comfortable, they felt after 1 year almost safe. The first community incident happened and it spread in a very short amount of time. So then actually people, locals really got paranoid and started to understand that. But it was not so clear for the average Cambodian, and it was also hard because people lived together in very small rooms, many people. So now to separate that and you know, in the course of a few months, find a way to separate rooms in houses that just don't have more rooms, where space is limited, it was hard for people to manage within the families.
Can you tell us what was changing for you at the time of COVID in the last 2 years?
Since I opened Matter House with my Cambodian friends and then a team of collaborators and people who helped, it's not, as we all know, always a single person who runs that. There were many people involved. So since I started to do my MetterHouse project with many other people, I was heavily involved in that. And I think we had up until COVID events almost every day, except Mondays. And we would only break for the national holidays here, for Christmas and New Year. So basically my life was MetterHouse and I enjoyed it pretty much. When COVID began, in the beginning, because I had also seen virus outbreaks such as SARS, MERS, the bird flu here. So I had already seen people wearing masks. I thought it will go away like the viruses before went away, and it didn't. And then we had to close. And we tried to stay open, but it became really clear that the government would follow a strict line here. So we couldn't keep the center open for the public. So suddenly I did not have to work on daily events anymore. I started, I think, as many other people, to back up hard drives, to do things that I hadn't done in almost 13 or 12 years. I could spend more time with my kids. I could watch a lot of the films that I had screened in my center without having the time to watch them by myself. So that there were definitely benefits of not having to run a cultural center every day. However, to see a scene that we had helped to build up in the course of the last, 12 years before COVID, from 2007 on, a scene that we had helped to assisted to build up, breaking down and being on the brink of disappearance was something that hurt. And we have always, part of our work was to advocate for the strengthening of the Cambodian art scene, and to also tell young artists to pursue their dreams and not be misled by, as we all know, parents, relatives who said, you should not become an artist, you should become a lawyer or a doctor because that will pay you a salary. We encourage people to follow their dreams and to pursue these careers in artistic fields. And when COVID hit, well, they were out of jobs, and the families would go back to these artists and say, but we told you, you should have never become an artist. It's an insecure business. So I felt a little bit bad for being such a staunch supporter of something that then under COVID did not work at all. However, I believe that, or I have to believe in a world that develops in cyclic ways. So that means what comes down must go up at some point. And we possibly have to look forward. And even though the benefits of COVID-19 are hard to see, we have to understand that maybe now it's also a moment to rethink, to rebuild, to restructure, and to look into things and problems that were always part of the field we're working in. For example, a lot of the art scene here was actually existent because of institutional funding. Yeah, so because there was only a little bit of arts and culture here, many NGOs, states, governments would actually put money into the game and help artists to develop, send them to school, provided them with money to pay for exhibition costs and so on. However, a real art scene needs an art market. And this market in the past, before COVID, was entirely expat and tourist driven. That means that local buyers, and Cambodia is a developing country, so the last 20 years also saw Cambodians getting rich. that means there is definitely, there are people in this country, local Cambodians, who could, help their fellow countrymen and fellow countrywomen to make a career by purchasing their works. And that actually didn't happen before COVID. It was always foreign buyers. This whole market was relying on foreign buyers. So when COVID hit, it all broke down. So now again, and I think this is kind of one of the more important strategical things to keep in mind. Now, after COVID, local artists have to understand that they need local buyers. Hopefully local people who own a solid income should now engage more in supporting their own people. We have to now leave an approach where the money has to come from overseas, because we saw already with COVID, once something like COVID happens, and that might happen again, we don't know, the whole market breaks down. So here now, actually, we, as a foreign institution, as a Cambodian German cultural center, we have to lobby the government, have to lobby locals to involve more, to make that a healthy, self-sustainable scene in comparison to a scene that is only relying on foreign donations, foreign sponsoring, and such. So again, I think that we all understand that now. Everybody here now who remains in this game, as I said, many people have left. Many foreign art activists have left and returned to their homes. So now the few people who still stay in Cambodia, the few foreign art institutions, people who are engaging here with the local art scene, they have to empower locals, artists, and businessmen and so on alike to create something which is actually receiving the money from local sources rather than being depending on outside income.
Nico, I would like to ask you if you can share with us a significant moment that happened to you in the last 2 years.
Oh yes, I can. We actually celebrated Matterhouse's 15th birthday at the end of January 2022. And we could only open after the COVID restrictions had been lifted in December. So it was a very nice moment to see the center again in full swing, having a lot of people, a live band on stage, and celebrating 15 years, which were actually cut a little bit shorter by 2 years being not able to operate the center. However, on that night, my first technician that ever worked for me at the first Matterhouse visited me. And back then in 2007, he was an 18-year-old kid. And I had met him during a filming in an orphanage. And because he was such a bright kid and open and clever and curious, when he left the orphanage and was looking for a job, I offered him to work in the first Matterhouse. So he worked for me 2-3 years, and then he moved on. And back then wanted to be a filmmaker, and guess what? Became a filmmaker and an actor, and ventured into creative fields. So he came to, congratulate me, say happy birthday. And I'm pretty pleased to see him. I had already seen him in a few Cambodian feature films. Again, I said he became producer, actor, director. So when I sat down with him, when the party was not as busy, at 11, 12, we had a drink together, and he said to me, Nico, I really have to thank you. You changed my life. And without you, I wouldn't be today where I am. And you see, it made me happy, because that's actually, at the end of the day, what you want. You want to make a difference. And we all understand that, working with artists, running an art center, it can't change the world. but as I saw and as I heard, it might change the lives of a few people around you. And at the end of the day, I mean, we all have big dreams, wishes, what we want to achieve. But example, if a young person tells you that because of you and what you did and how you helped this person, it changed his life, and he feels that, and he appreciates that. That's actually one of the greatest moments I can think of. Yeah. So I was really happy to hear that. You see, and it's all what you wish for, that at the end of the day, whatever you do leaves some marks. And if this is on a personal level, well, I think that's a big achievement.
On the time of COVID in Cambodia, you and your colleague made a film that was called Cambodia COVID-19, Marked on Art. So joining us for this part is David Brown, a filmmaker from Australia. His main subject is dealing with human rights, and he's mainly working in Cambodia and Nepal. I would like to ask the both of you if you can tell us how this film was evolving and what was the idea behind it.
I'm operating a cultural center in Cambodia since 2007. And this cultural center, as all the other cultural spaces in Cambodia, were closed in the beginning of 2020, when COVID hit Cambodia and the world. So for 2 years, the center was unoperative, and we still could continue to make films. However, because of our own situation and the hardships that artists that we know and we previously worked with endured, there came this idea to basically focus on the implications of COVID-19 and what did it do, or what it still does do, to our young and very fragile art scene here. So we, David and I, set out to talk to colleagues, friends, artists we know, and we tried to portray the way COVID-19 affected this scene in the format of a short documentary, which we now have finalized and which we will be included in the Cambodian International Film Festival in a few months. Now COVID is over. However, we still feel these repercussions, and we are happy to share the situation with the world. Important to know, without taking the excitement watching the film, is that COVID-19 in Cambodia did not only affect us all economically. There were also people from the artwork that passed away because of the virus. And it is also important to note that, in the contrary to many Western countries, the Cambodian government did not provide any assistance to art spaces and artists who lost their complete income. Interesting to note is also that, in the contrary to Western artists, most of our artists, they are already married. People here, they're married very young. So that means that possibly a 25-year-old artist might already have a family of 3 or 4 or 5 people even to feed. And then there are the parents. So when COVID-19 hit and everything was closed, people did not only struggle to pay their rent or couldn't buy any more furniture or whatever you buy as luxury goods. They could barely pay for the food that they needed. And then there were lockdowns, and so it was a very, very hard time for many people here. I mean, the community in a whole, but also specifically our artist community. So and the idea was to also look into solutions, what possibly artists could have done or could do in the near future to overcome these hardships. And if you compare the reactions in the foreign world to what is possible in Cambodia, for example, on switching all the business online is for us here very hard to do. Yeah, still in a developing country. internet, for example, is only accessible and fast in the cities, in the countryside, and the majority of Cambodians still live in the countryside, 80%. Yeah. So these people, they have almost no access to internet, and if they have it, it's very expensive. So that means to remedy a situation where you can't have physical contacts, where galleries are not open to sell the work, actually caused a lot of trouble here and a big disruption. And that is also, once you understand that this art scene in Cambodia is very young, because of the troubled history of Cambodia, the art scene here started in 2003, 2004. So that means only 15, 16 years after artists were able to make a little bit of money, that whole thing collapsed again. And now, after COVID-19, we really have to rebuild it entirely. Yeah, lots of art spaces have closed, lots of artists had to go out of business and found themselves other jobs. So we lost a big portion of what we had achieved in the last 15 years, and that definitely hurts.
I think, of course, a lot of the art spaces rely on tourists for their income, and hence that flows onto the artists. So during COVID-19, with the borders nearly locked for nearly 2 years, the income halted completely. And of course, all of the art spaces were closed as well. So it was a very tough situation for artists to deal with.
Yeah, and also we learned in the film, and you might want to see it then while watching the film, that example, there were artists that were clever enough to save some money, so they could basically survive on their savings. Other artists, you will also see that in the film, they basically relied on food donations of the neighbors or the families, and so on and so on. But the government here, they, for example, gave incentives and some benefits to, for example, tourism businesses that David just mentioned. The tourism sector was also dead for 2 years. So if you had a travel agency or a hotel, you might be able to get some money from the government. But as a visual artist, there was, or as an art space, there was zero support. Yeah. So we all, including us and including the space that I run, Meta House, we all had to make ends meet. Yeah. And now actually, even COVID-19 is over, the Cambodian government was kind of strict and resolute in their response to the pandemic. So now actually, we don't need to wear masks anymore. The spaces are open, we can operate. However, the tourists are still not yet coming back. Yeah. So we envision that possibly the problem remains with us for the next 2 or 3 years. And in a country where people are really, as I said earlier, depending on a swift return, they need the money to pay their rent, they need the money to feed the kids and send them to school. It will actually lead to even more people leaving that field of art, visual art, performing arts, and so on, and just look for something that is more sustainable for them. Yeah.
I want, maybe you can share a moment in the film, like, because we said, David, you are with human rights and it's about the humanity and how people are coming and helping each other with the support or without support. Maybe you can share a beautiful moment of helping, like other people helping other people, or something that was really squeezing your heart.
With the inoculation, with the for COVID, I was constantly contacting people in Australia, and a lot of people thought it was a conspiracy theory, like it's not really happening out there in the world. And we were on the ground in Cambodia, and we were talking to many people, and there was no anti-vaccination, or very little anti-vaccination in Cambodia. And people were saying, why wouldn't you have it, and why wouldn't you look after your family? And so people were voluntarily getting tests before they visited their families in the province and things like that. So the response of the population compared to lots of people in the Western world was entirely different. So it's quite quite interesting and quite insightful to see that different response. And we learned something there, I think.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, for me, the one of the more moving moments is what you see in the beginning of the film was the passing of one of the most important teachers. Yeah, Sri Bandol was a visual artist who had survived the genocide of the Khmer Rouge, who grew up in a refugee camp for more than 10 years. So he was a pretty strong guy and had already endured lots of hardships, and was then able to return from Thailand, from the refugee camp, to his new home, Battambang, in Cambodia, only in the 90s. So for 20 years, he had nurtured a young generation of artists and did that with passion. And while still working as an artist and selling his works and, founding a family and having kids. And so now this guy, I think at the age of 50, passes in the course of 3 or 4 days, leaves a wife, leaves kids, leaves an arts community in Battambang, which is actually in the countryside. It's kind of a grassroots art school, yeah, where they teach kids from the village to paint. And some of them actually become artists, street children, get a chance to express themselves and express their feelings. So this guy, Sri Bandol, he passed in the course of 3 or 4 days, yeah, after having survived so much already in his life. And not only the family, but this whole community in Battambang continues to grieve, and asked, why is that, and understanding also that there are also many people in the West who don't really understand what COVID really is and what it does. And as David said, conspiracy theories, is the virus real? And so, but here in Cambodia, given also the knowledge level of people, it looks like a punishment. Don't forget that we are living here in a Buddhist country. So usually, people who die so early, it looks like a punishment from God, like if they would have done something, and that's how the community perceives it. So they don't really understand why you have to pass. They don't really understand the biological implications of the virus. For them, it's just
Karma.
a disaster, and again, and that leaves a big gap. Yeah, it leaves a big gap in this community. And we attended this memorial service for him at this art school, and you see it in the film, in the beginning of the film. And it was just a moving moment where all the students performed for him last time, where you had street artists, graffiti artists doing murals and other stuff. There were performing art, performance art on stage. People were even a kid was playing Ave Maria on a violin, possibly not really perfect, but it was just this moment where this whole community came together, the whole village surrounding this art school, parents, grandparents, teachers, artists, and there was it was a very sad moment, and you felt it. It was also a very dignifying moment, yeah, because it was well organized, but it was also very moving, yeah, to say bye-bye to one of the most important art teachers in this country who had just passed because of COVID-19.
What was beautiful is they were using art to express all of that, so that what the person who died, he really stood for promoting art in Cambodia, and that's what was used at his memorial for everybody, a medium for everybody to express through.
Right, and also a mix of modern art and traditional art. Yeah, that's actually also what kind of still makes our scene here special. That Cambodia is developing, it is advancing, but it is not. If you speak about the arts scene in Cambodia, there are still lots of traditional art forms that prevail, and that's also liked by the government. So there is this intersection of, especially there in the countryside, of tradition, rural versus urban, Yeah, because people there, they come from the countryside. Some of them have already worked in the cities, but they're still embedded in that village mentality. And it's a very charming moment to see that and to see that combination of something that's very old, and that's part of the identity here of the people, but then it already transcends into something very modern and very new. Yeah. So and this art school, actually, where the teacher died, it comes from the refugee camps. It still connects these modern times in Cambodia with the skyscrapers and the shopping malls and the brands and so on, which is also part of our daily life now, to something that is Cambodia's more recent past. A genocide, a civil war on for 30 years, people displaced, a quarter of the population dead, a young generation that is looking for identity, for a vision, how to work on that history in the future, educating the young kids about the past and so on. Yeah, so that it happened there, sort of at the intersection between Cambodia's very brutal history and its kind of colorful presence before COVID. That was something really interesting to see for us also, and the moving moment to catch and to attend, because you see, I'm in the country now for 20 years, so I have basically seen this scene, and also artists, also people like Srebandol, the guy who passed away, ascending. And now, because of COVID, it's not only that part of the scene is that we had to also say bye-bye to a very loved teacher and artist.
So thank you, David, for joining us for this part of the talk. And I'm looking forward to see and hear about other and new project of yours and new films. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
I wanted to ask you if you can tell me if something changed in the talk and collaboration between other institutes in Cambodia and around you.
When we started Matterhouse, one of the objectives was also to unite at this stage very tiny and small art scene that was kind of fractured. So when I started that, again, I'm a journalist. We are basically researchers and able to investigate a little bit by trade. I found out that the few people that were in this scene, even they were not really connected. And nobody would basically, in these early days, in 2006, 2007, speak to each other. And you know, the French Cultural Center was with itself, the Russian Cultural Center was with itself, Matterhouse had just started. There were a few organizations, a few activists, a few artists, they didn't really speak to each other. So in the beginning, one of the aims of Matterhouse was to establish a meeting platform, which then also benefited, or would have, and it did benefit me as a researcher, as somebody who was new to the country, somebody who wanted to learn about possibly the specifics of this country and this scene. So we established a meeting point and we became a meeting point. And then in the course of the last 10 years before COVID, new people were joining the scene, other people were leaving the scene, there were more and more artists. There was also a moment when Cambodian art had kind of an international spread. Suddenly in 2011, you had people from Sotheby's, here from Christie's. There were curators flying, and at some point, the first Cambodian entered Documenta. Some Cambodian artists were able to secure contracts with foreign galleries. They started to sell well. And there was a moment when people, you know, as it is, everybody got busy. They didn't really talk to each other as much as they should anymore. And we always tried, I mean, Matterhouse as an organization tried to push for an association, you know, a loose club of arts organization representatives and artists and activists to talk to each other, and also to lobby towards the government, lobby towards funders, lobby towards local businesses in order to make that scene grow. And it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. So now, because of COVID, there was this kind of 2-year break. I think many people who still remain in that scene, now they understand the necessity for establishing such an organization. Yeah, and then recently, one of the bigger key players, Cambodian Living Arts, an organization that deals predominantly with the preservation of traditional art forms, but also educates students and wants to establish art in the Cambodian school curriculum where it is still underrepresented. So this organization now has established kind of an umbrella organization for other arts organizations. And galleries here from our surroundings are also now pushing for, you know, industry events in brackets or whatever it is. So I think that COVID and the hardships that COVID brought has taught a lot of people who were formerly reluctant to cooperate more on a daily basis about the importance of doing so. And then that actually now goes back to what I said when I founded Matterhouse. I want us to form a community. Yeah. And I think now, after 15 years and after COVID, we're finally there. People understand that if we want to achieve something, we can only achieve it together.
Nico, I wanted to ask you, what is the future plan for the Matterhouse and how you see it's going to grow and develop?
For Matterhouse is definitely, again, something that we rethinked during and after COVID-19. As I mentioned earlier, the scene and also our center was always kept alive by donations and sponsoring from foreign countries, foreign funding. I said earlier, I have a Cambodian wife. We have raised 2 kids here. So I would like to continue my Matterhouse project in the years to come. The world is changing, as we all know. Cambodia is changing. Funding might not always be available. I mean, look into the European refugee crisis that is a few years ago. Look into the ongoing war in Ukraine. Funding policies might change, interest might change, attention is moving from one country to the other. So in order for us to survive and in order for us to still make a difference and possibly even expand our programs, reach more people and so on, we need to come up with different business models. As I said earlier already, the country needs a local art market. And for us, we need to see how we are able to generate revenue here in the country in order to be able to not only pay for our running costs, but also in order to be of assistance to artists, possibly be able to give small fundings, help young filmmakers to shoot their films, provide visual artists with money for the materials that they might not always have and be able to earn by themselves. So here's the moment. Any cultural enterprise needs money. And as what I said earlier, as my recommendation to Cambodia and to the Cambodian art scene would be to be less dependable on foreign sponsoring. The same goes for us. We need to find ways to generate income in the country, and without actually, that it doesn't necessarily mean to charge entrance fees. I have not mentioned that. The idea of Matterhouse was always to have the events free of charge, that everybody can attend. And the idea was also never to separate the audiences and say, well, in order for Cambodians to have free entrance, Westerners should pay entrance. I don't believe in that. I think intercultural communication, intercultural work means for us to be and to work on eye level. That means that I can't put the foreigners before the Cambodians or vice versa. We have to be treated equally. We treat each other equally. So in this regard, free entrance for Cambodians means free entrance for Westerners. So again, we just have to see how are we going to make that work and which partners we can find in the country social corporate responsibility, local sponsoring is still in its infancy. And as we all know, art is not possibly a major focus for big consumer good producers or such. However, we have to possibly get art a little bit out of its niche. We have to be creative in finding ways to gather more audience, to gather more income in order to continue to grow. I think the lesson out of COVID, or the result, is not to close, to cease operation, to make it smaller, but also still to expand. But how to finance that expansion, with whom partners we do that, who can we actually talk or lure into working with us, that is something that we have to work on. Yeah. And I think for us all, COVID meant and still means a reset. So now how we work on that reset is something that we need to envision. Yeah. So there's again now, as it was in the beginning of Matterhouse, a moment where one needs to close the eyes and dream a little bit, and then see how to make and turn these dreams into reality.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us for this talk with NICO MESTERHARM. For more information about the Matterhouse, films, and more, please check below.